Mom, I'm heading out. As usual, after seeing my daughter and husband off, I headed to the laundry room. I was off duty today, so I decided to do the laundry myself for the first time in a while. Normally, my daughter Daisy takes care of it since I'm usually busy with work, even though I tell her she doesn't need to, knowing how tough her studies are. Daisy insists, "No, I'll do it." I can't help but chuckle to myself, wondering why she's so stubborn about it. After the washing machine finished its cycle, I began moving the clothes into the dryer, and just as I grabbed Daisy's pajamas, I noticed something strange. What? No. What is this? There was a dark, reddish stain on her pajamas. As a doctor, I immediately knew what it was. The color, the smell, there was no mistaking it. It was blood. Daisy, have you hurt yourself somewhere? I frantically searched my memory, trying to recall any signs from my daughter's recent behavior. Lately, she'd been more absent-minded in the mornings. No, it couldn't be. A dreadful possibility crept into my mind. I didn't want to believe it. Could my husband, who's always been so kind, have done something like this to his own daughter? To find out for sure, I rushed to the electronics store to buy a hidden camera. My name is Sierra Montgomery, a 40-year-old pediatrician working at a local private clinic. I live with my husband, Ethan, who is an internist, and our 8th-grade daughter, Daisy. Ethan's family has run a medical practice for generations, and it's always been assumed he would take over from his father, Graham, and become the head of the clinic one day. Currently, Ethan is working at a different university hospital to gain more experience. Ethan has a younger brother, Lucas. Unlike Ethan, Lucas didn't pursue medicine and ended up working at a regular company. Lucas is also married with a daughter about the same age as Daisy, but we rarely see them outside of family gatherings. Lucas defied his parents' expectations by not becoming a doctor, which seems to have created some distance between him and the family. Ethan, on the other hand, was always academically gifted, something I've heard endlessly from my parents-in-law, Graham and Harriet. While the other kids were busy with comics and video games, Ethan spent every waking moment studying from dawn till dusk, they'd say. That's how he stayed at the top of his class every year. But then again, it's only natural as the eldest son of the Montgomery family. To them, Ethan was their pride and joy. When Daisy was born, Ethan was ecstatic, almost embarrassingly so. He missed a birth itself, but despite just starting his career as a doctor, he canceled a dinner with a renowned professor to come see Daisy and me. I remember him gently holding newborn Daisy's tiny hand and tearfully declaring, "I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she's happy." Watching him then, I knew I hadn't made a mistake marrying him. Being a doctor meant Ethan often couldn't make it home because of work, but he always made up for it by spending every moment of his days off with Daisy. Ethan bought a house with a large yard so Daisy could run around freely, and he even took her to amusement parks and aquariums. Sometimes, Harriet, who lived far away, would call with what felt like an interrogation. "Are you making sure Daisy is studying properly?" Once, when Ethan was playing catch with Daisy, he told me with a frown, "Just tell her we're making sure she's studying." So I would follow his lead and say, "Don't worry, she's doing just fine," while stifling a laugh. Ethan often said that because he hadn't been allowed to play freely as a child, he was always studying. He wanted Daisy to grow up carefree and enjoy her childhood. The days Ethan and I spent watching Daisy grow were some of the most precious and happiest of my life. However, things started to feel uneasy after Daisy failed her entrance exams for a private middle school. When she got too nervous, she couldn't fully show her potential. That seemed to affect her performance during the exam. She didn't pass the entrance exam for her first choice school. "Dad, Mom, I'm so sorry." Daisy, who was usually all smiles, broke down in tears for the first time in ages. I held my sobbing daughter tightly and said, "The result is disappointing, but you worked so hard. No one will blame you. You should be proud of yourself." Those were the only weak words of comfort I could offer. While I desperately wanted to see her smile again, Ethan was the complete opposite, restless and anxious. "This is a big deal. How are we going to tell Mom?" Ethan said, wearing a look of worry I'd never seen before. He furrowed his brows, crossing his arms, deep in thought. He looked like a soldier about to head into battle, filled with fear and uncertainty. "It's okay, right? It's not like it's a life or death situation." My half-hearted reassurance only earned a sigh from Ethan. Soon after, Harriet called. "She passed, right? Why haven't you told me yet?" Harriet pressed me for the result as soon as I picked up the phone. Ethan, his hand trembling, took the phone and quietly muttered, "Sorry, she didn't make it." "What are you saying? Don't joke about this." Harriet's furious voice was so loud, I could hear it clearly on my end. Then Graham took over the call, summoning us to the in-laws' house immediately. "You're late." "Well, come in." Graham, looking irritated, led us to the living room and made 3 cups of coffee. "Harriet's in bed. The shock's been too much for her," Graham said, glaring at Ethan. Soon, Harriet, likely awakened by the commotion, came stomping into the room, her footsteps deliberately loud. "Harriet, please don't push yourself too hard," I said, trying to be considerate, but it only made things worse. "Whose fault do you think this is?" Harriet shouted, her voice so forceful it felt like it shook the room. "I'm sorry, we couldn't get Daisy into that private middle school." Faced with Harriet's overwhelming anger, Ethan apologized deeply. "Shame on our family. Even Lucas, who didn't pursue medicine, got accepted. This is just unbelievable." Harriet spat out her words with a deep look of disgust, while Graham said nothing, only releasing a long, heavy sigh. The private middle school Daisy had failed to get into was the same school that Graham, Harriet, and the other Montgomery siblings, including Ethan, had attended. It was obvious that Harriet saw her failure as a humiliation beyond words. "How dare you tarnish the Montgomery family name? What kind of education have you been giving her? All talk about making her study, but the results are horrendous. I'm sorry. We just wanted Daisy to grow up freely, without too much pressure." Ethan quickly exclaimed, "Hey!" He hurriedly covered my mouth with his hand. It was clear he didn't want me to make things worse by saying anything unnecessary. "I'm sorry, never mind." I obediently withdrew my statement, following Ethan's signal. After a few seconds, Harriet snorted in dissatisfaction before glaring at me. "Is Daisy even Ethan's child? Really? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Come on, think about it. Ethan became a successful doctor, but Daisy, she couldn't even pass a private middle school entrance exam. Something doesn't add up. Daisy is Ethan and my child. There's no doubt about that. Regardless, make sure she gets into a private high school. If she goes to a public school, the Montgomery family will be a laughing stock. It's embarrassing to our roots." She applied more pressure before she and Graham left the living room and retreated to the back room. I stood there, stunned, until Ethan gently patted my shoulder. "Let's go, Daisy's waiting," he said, his voice soft and reassuring. For several days after that, Daisy blamed herself for not passing the entrance exam. She started eating less, too. No matter what comforting words I offered, she wouldn't come out of her room. "Your life isn't over. It's just middle school. Public school is fine, too." I left her meals outside her closed door and kept encouraging her, refusing to give up. Eventually, my persistence paid off. She made friends at the public school, and by the time 6 months had passed, she seemed much happier. "Mom, it's my classmate's birthday tomorrow. What do you think I should get her as a gift?" She was smiling again, like she used to. Every morning, she waved her hand cheerfully. "I'm off to school." Seeing her so full of life again, I finally felt a sense of relief. Ethan's workload at the university hospital had increased around that time, which meant he was often home late, and he didn't get to spend much time with her anymore. But knowing Ethan, who always worried about Daisy more than anyone else, I was sure that he was probably even more anxious and unsettled than I was. So when he came home one night, I gave him an update on how Daisy was doing. Hey, so about Daisy. I was certain Ethan would light up with joy after hearing the news. Oh really? So what? His disinterested response left me feeling utterly disappointed. I continued to talk about Daisy, thinking he might at least show some reaction. I'm exhausted. Can you please stop? Ethan waved his hand dismissively and retreated to the bedroom without another word. Time flew by, and before I knew it, Daisy had turned 15. This year, she needs to study harder than ever to get into her dream private high school. However, putting too much pressure on Daisy could backfire. We've seen it happen before, and I fear the same results if we push too hard. Even if she doesn't get into her first choice school, it's not a life or death situation. I kept reminding myself not to place too many expectations on her, even though I wanted her to succeed. Fortunately, Daisy has been doing well, not only academically but also in extracurricular activities. In her free time, she spends quality moments with her close friends, enjoying herself. When she took her first set of finals as an 8th grader, she scored over 90% in every subject, a fantastic achievement. During the following parent-teacher conference, her teacher assured us she's well within range to get into her first-choice private school. When I told her about the praise from her teacher, she smiled proudly, saying, "See, I told you." After the parent-teacher conference, it was just the two of us driving home together for the first time in a while. Daisy sat in the passenger seat, staring absent-mindedly out the window, perhaps tired from all the excitement at school. "Hey, Daisy, aren't you feeling hot in that outfit?" Since starting 8th grade, Daisy had taken to wearing long sleeves under her short-sleeved school uniform, even on hot days. It's for sun protection. Teenage girls have a lot to worry about, you know, Daisy said with a laugh. And at that moment, I didn't think much of it. Around 10 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of Ethan's car pulling into the garage, followed by the sound of his footsteps approaching the door. Ever since Daisy had failed her private middle school entrance exam, there had been a wall between Ethan and me. But tonight, I was finally able to share some good news. I hoped to see a smile on my husband's face as I told him about Daisy's test results and the parent-teacher conference. Ethan glanced over all the test papers, then let out a sarcastic laugh. "Not a single perfect score, huh?" As he spoke, he started crumpling up the test paper that didn't quite reach 100%. "Don't say that. She worked hard. You should at least acknowledge her effort." I grabbed the crumpled paper from his hand and began smoothing out the wrinkles with my palm. Even the teacher said she's on track to get into her first-choice private school. A public school teacher's word. You seriously trust that? You don't have to say it like that. I was at a loss for words, overwhelmed by his constant dismissal of our daughter's efforts. If this were a private middle school, no student would be happy with those scores. Back in our day, we studied without even thinking of sleep, just to avoid falling behind everyone else. Ethan's eyes were fixed on her bedroom door as he spoke. "She's doing the best she can." I stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. There was no point in continuing the discussion. I would only end up feeling more frustrated. Giving up, I decided to head to the bedroom and rest. How much time had passed since then? I woke up feeling Ethan moving beside me as he got out of bed. I reached for my smartphone on the nightstand to check the time, and it was just after 2 a.m. I glanced to the side, and Ethan wasn't there. He was probably in the bathroom, or maybe went to get some water, since he had been waking up frequently in the middle of the night lately. Ethan had been getting up and leaving the room almost every night recently. It seemed like he had been unable to sleep, probably due to the stress piling up from work. If this continues much longer, maybe he should consider seeing a counselor. At that moment, I was more worried about Ethan's mental state than about Daisy. I waited for him to return, but he didn't, and eventually, sleepiness took over me once again. "I'll talk to Ethan tomorrow. I just hope he'll really listen this time." That thought lingered in the hazy corners of my mind as I drifted back into sleep. At 6 a.m., my alarm rang as usual, and I got out of bed. Ethan was still lying next to me, showing no signs of waking up. What time did Ethan finally fall asleep last night? That question played on my mind as I began preparing breakfast. 30 minutes later, Daisy came down, looking distant and disconnected. "Daisy, good morning." I greeted her cheerfully, but it seemed like she didn't hear me at all. She slumped into a chair, staring blankly. "You didn't wash your face, did you? And you haven't brushed your teeth either, have you?" At my words, Daisy suddenly snapped back to attention, standing up quickly. "Good morning, Mom." "Huh, what, are you going to get the paper?" She started to dash toward the front door, and I held her back with a chuckle. "Are you still half asleep? I already got the paper. Now go wash your face. You've got school today, remember." "Oh right, I completely forgot. It's almost summer break, so I've been totally relaxed." Daisy stuck her tongue out playfully, as if to exaggerate the joke. After Daisy left for school, Ethan slowly got up a bit later. "I'm skipping breakfast," he said, quickly getting dressed and heading off to work within 5 minutes without eating anything. Since I was off duty, I decided to do the laundry myself for the first time in a while. Usually, Daisy takes care of it after she gets home from school. I always tell her that with her studies and extracurricular activities, she doesn't have to worry about the laundry, but she insists, saying, "No, I'll do it." Why is she so stubborn about it? I thought, unable to help but laugh a little. When the washing machine cycle finished, I moved the clothes to the dryer, but the moment I grabbed Daisy's pajamas, I noticed something unusual. "What? No, this can't be." Her pajamas were stained with dark, reddish marks. Being a doctor, I instantly knew what they were. From the color and the smell, it was unmistakable. It was blood, and not just in one spot. The blood stains were scattered all over her pajamas. "Daisy, have you been hurt?" I racked my brain, trying to recall any recent signs, desperately searching my memory for anything unusual about her behavior. Lately, Daisy had been more and more absent-minded in the mornings, and it seemed to have gotten worse in the past few days. Could it be? A horrible possibility came to mind. I stopped doing the laundry, quickly changed my clothes, and headed to the electronics store to buy a hidden camera. I don't want to believe it. How could Ethan, who had always been so gentle to our daughter, do something like this? But to find out the truth, and most importantly, to protect Daisy, I couldn't afford to hesitate. The next day, after both my husband and daughter had gone out, I decided to check the footage from the hidden camera I had set up in Daisy's room the day before, even before cleaning up the breakfast dishes. If my suspicions were correct, Daisy was in a very dangerous situation. Please, let me be wrong. I just needed to see the footage quickly, and if my worries turned out to be nothing more than my imagination, I could breathe a sigh of relief. With trembling fingers, I pressed the play button, praying for my fears to be unfounded. The hidden camera I purchased was high-tech, able to clearly record not only the movements and expressions of people, but also their conversations. When Daisy got into bed and turned off the lights, the camera automatically switched to night vision mode. Even in complete darkness, every movement in the room was clearly visible. For a while after Daisy fell asleep, nothing happened, and time passed quietly. There was no point in watching anymore. Thinking that, I sped up the footage to 2 and then 3 times the normal speed. If the morning came without incident, I could chalk it all up to my imagination. However, at around 2 a.m., my hopes were shattered. The door to the room opened quietly, and a large figure slowly walked in. The moment I saw the figure, and the way they walked, I immediately knew who it was. It was none other than my husband, Ethan. This can't be happening. Please, let this be some kind of mistake. Almost instinctively, I found myself praying to God, and to the image of Ethan on the screen, begging for it all to be some terrible misunderstanding. But my silent pleas couldn't reach the Ethan in the video. Ethan stopped next to Daisy's bed, and suddenly ripped the sheets off her. "How long are you going to keep sleeping?" Get up already." At his voice, Daisy quickly scrambled out of bed. "You're 3 minutes late. I've told you over and over again, be up and waiting for me 30 minutes before I come in." I'm sorry, Dad." Daisy knelt on the floor, apologizing. Ethan turned on the desk lamp and ordered Daisy, "Sit down already. We're picking up where we left off yesterday. Why didn't you get 100% on that last test? Are you having fun embarrassing me like this? Is that what you wanted? To make me look like a fool?" "No, it wasn't like that. It's my fault for not getting a perfect score. Please, forgive me." And so, the grueling study session between Ethan and Daisy began again, their dynamic as disturbing as ever. "Stop mocking me. Do you even realize who's teaching you this? If you don't score a perfect 100% on the next test, I'll throw you out of this house." As he shouted these words, Ethan not only verbally dominated Daisy, but physically inflicted pain, asserting control over her completely. "I'm sorry, I swear I'll get perfect scores next time, so please, stop this." Unable to endure the pain any longer, Daisy finally broke down in tears. This cycle continued on, and Daisy was only released from her torment after 5 a.m. had passed. "You've made fewer mistakes this time, but don't think I'm satisfied yet. Tomorrow, be up and ready." With those parting words, Ethan left the room without a single word of encouragement for Daisy's efforts. She remained sitting at the desk, her head in her hands. "I can't take this anymore. I just can't." Her heartbreaking cries were the last thing the camera recorded in the now empty room. As soon as the video ended, I was overwhelmed by my own helplessness. How could I have missed such a tragedy happening every night? Puzzled, I immediately checked Daisy's room. To my shock, soundproofing had been added to the door, walls, and even the windows without my knowing. Ethan must have done it so I wouldn't notice. I just have to protect her, no matter what. Worried for Daisy, I explained the situation to my clinic's head doctor and arranged for another physician to cover my afternoon appointments. By evening, I knew it was close to the time Daisy would be coming home, so I parked near the school gate. After waiting for a bit, I saw Daisy walking out of the school with her friends, chatting happily. When I waved, her eyes widened in surprise. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Her friends, noticing us, politely waved goodbye and walked off ahead. "Weren't you supposed to be at work? I got the afternoon off. Thought I'd surprise you and walk home together." "Skipping work? You probably inconvenienced everyone at the clinic." Daisy gave me a playful smirk. "Maybe so. But right now, I'm more worried about you," I answered seriously, and suddenly Daisy's smile vanished. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "Daisy, please don't hide things from me. What do you know?" "I know what you were doing with Dad last night." "It's not just last night, right? This has been happening every night, hasn't it?" As I brought up the main issue, her face showed pure shock. Then, as if she couldn't keep it a secret anymore, she burst into tears. "Dad's not here now, so cry as much as you want." I held my sobbing daughter tightly in my arms. After a while, Daisy calmed down and finally began to speak the truth. According to her, Ethan had been coming into her room every night for the past 3 months. At first, it was just to help her study for about an hour. But gradually, things escalated. When Daisy made a mistake on an answer, Ethan's frustration started coming out not just in words, but in actions. Dad made me do a workbook he bought every day. If I didn't finish in time or got even one question wrong, he'd use a ruler on me. I kept telling him to stop, but he always said, "I'm doing this for your own good," and never stopped. As she said this, Daisy rolled up her sleeve. "Oh my, what has he done?" Her wrists and arms were covered with bruises and scrapes. Seeing Daisy's sorrowful eyes broke my heart. "I had no idea you were going through something so awful. I'm so sorry I didn't notice sooner. But why didn't you tell me? If you had come to me, I could have helped you much earlier." Daisy shook her head, tears of frustration welling up. "Dad said, 'Mom's sick of how dumb you are too.' He said, 'If you don't want to be abandoned, You have to study harder. That's ridiculous. I would never say such a thing. He lied to you. I would never, ever abandon you. I fought. There's no way Mom would ever say something like that. But Dad used to be kind, too. So, Daisy sniffled as she said that. I'm sorry. No matter what happens, I will never abandon you. I promise, so please believe me. I hugged Daisy tightly again, as if trying to prove my sincerity. The sudden change in her once trusted father had made Daisy doubt even my kindness. I couldn't forgive Ethan for repeatedly treating our gentle and kind-hearted daughter so cruelly. At the same time, I reflected on how the Ethan who used to be so gentle could have changed so drastically, and what had triggered that transformation. Yes, it all started when Daisy failed her entrance exams for a private middle school. Up until then, he had been committed to raising Daisy with a carefree childhood, letting her grow at her own pace. But that single failure shattered everything. The harsh words from Graham and Harriet had made me uncomfortable, too. Yet, Daisy's smile had helped me ignore the tension and maintain our relationships without any issue until now. Daisy didn't need to attend a private school to succeed. She just needed to stay true to her own goals and walk the path she believed in. Telling myself this gave me the courage, as a mother, to support her wholeheartedly. But he seemed to think differently. He genuinely believed that Daisy had tarnished the Montgomery family name by failing to meet their expectations. Ethan was always someone who would overthink things once he made up his mind. With invisible pressure from his own parents, he must have pushed himself to the breaking point, and now the worst possible outcome had occurred. His frustration had been directed at his own daughter. I'm not like Dad, so please trust me. Right now, you might not have confidence in trusting family, but I swear, I'll protect you till the very end. I looked into her eyes and declared my promise with conviction. After seating Daisy in the passenger seat of the car, I told her, dinner might be late tonight, but bear with it, okay? Instead of heading home, I drove straight to the Child Protection Agency. Luckily, Ethan was working an overnight shift at the university hospital that day. He'd be too busy attending to patients coming in at night and wouldn't be home until around 10 the next morning. I wasn't worried about him noticing us being out late tonight. For years, I had worked as a pediatrician. Among my patients were children who had suffered terrible treatment at the hands of their parents. Every time I saw them, I felt powerless as a doctor, unable to do much. The only thing I could do for them was report to the Child Protection Agency. Sometimes, that helped resolve things, but other times, it only made the situation worse. Whenever I heard news about children becoming victims, I couldn't help but question whether I was truly making a difference. But I never imagined that such a fate would befall my own daughter. The injured children brought in for treatment couldn't even defy their parents. They would silently endure, gazing at me with such sorrowful eyes, pleading for something beyond words. That's right, they're just like those kids. When I saw the countless blood stains on Daisy's pajamas, the faces of the abused children I'd encountered in my career as a doctor flashed through my mind all at once. Until now, as a doctor, I always felt like I was hitting the limits of what I could do. A doctor isn't allowed to intervene directly in a patient's home life. But this time, I wasn't just a doctor, I was a mother. A victim's mother. I couldn't just push this aside as someone else's problem. I had to protect my child with my own hands, no matter what it took. At Child Services, there was a seasoned worker I'd known for years through my job. She was someone I trusted, someone who always put the well-being of the children first. I knew she would help us, and on top of that, we had the camera footage as proof. Daisy sat in the passenger seat, looking anxious, listening to the radio. She was scared that if we handled this wrong, everything would get worse. Don't worry, trust Mom. Maybe my words got through to her, because Daisy nodded and said, okay. When we arrived at Child Services, my colleague listened to our story with complete seriousness. She promised that she would cooperate with the police and take immediate action. The next day, I requested emergency leave from the clinic's director. I left the house, pretending to head to work, just as I normally would. The police and child services were set to arrive when Ethan came home. Until then, I would wait outside with them. Around 10 a.m., Ethan pulled up, looking exhausted and still completely unaware of what was about to unfold. Daisy clung to the hem of my shirt, hiding behind me. Ethan walked up to the front door, still oblivious to our presence. "Welcome back, Ethan." "Sierra, what's going on? Did you forget something?" I called out from behind, and Ethan casually turned to face me. His expression froze when he saw the police officer standing there. Who are you guys?" It seemed like he was desperately trying to figure out why his wife was standing there with the police. The child services worker explained the situation calmly, but Ethan scoffed, pretending not to understand. What are you talking about? We've spoken with Daisy and Mrs. Montgomery. What you've been doing has crossed the line." Ethan smirked and shook his head, saying, "I don't know what these two told you, but you've got it all wrong. I'm disciplining her. Every night I'm helping my daughter study because she's slow to catch on. I should be thanked, not accused. Right, Daisy?" He turned to Daisy, his gaze intense and intimidating. Daisy flinched, her body stiffening as his eyes bore into her. Her grip on my shirt tightened even more. I turned and held Daisy tightly. "You're safe. Mom will protect you." Daisy looked up at me, and after a moment, she nodded silently. Finally, she stepped back, 2 steps, gaining a little space between us. I turned to face him again. "What you've done is not discipline. You've crossed a line, and it's gone too far." I stood in front of Daisy, shielding her from him. Even after hearing that pointed comment, Ethan didn't reflect on himself. Instead, he burst into loud laughter. "See, it was your parenting that messed things up. Mom was right all along. If I hadn't been so influenced by you, I would have pushed hard on studying from the beginning." It was as if he was channeling Graham and Harriet's opinions directly. The Ethan who used to say he wanted to raise our child freely. Where had that man gone? Now the man standing in front of me was like a completely different person from the Ethan I once knew. "Listen up. The fact that our daughter has stained the Montgomery family name is entirely your fault. As her mother, don't say that. She's not a stain on anything." I let my emotions flare up, but then remembered that Daisy was watching. I stopped my hand from lashing out. This child has always been careful to consider her parents' feelings. No matter how terribly you treated her, she kept smiling. She has wonderful friends, too. As a person, she's far more admirable than you'll ever be. So what? If she's not recognized for her academic achievements, nobody will care about her in this world. Look at me. I'm respected as a doctor. Is this what happens when you're pressured to focus only on academics? You have no right to trap her in your suffocating ideals and rob her of her freedom. We both grew increasingly heated, and Ethan, driven by his emotions, moved as if he was about to grab me. "Dad, Mom, please, stop." Daisy, who had been trembling in fear, finally whispered in a small voice to stop us. Even as Ethan still lunged towards me, a social worker intervened. "Hold on, let's listen to what Daisy has to say first." At that, everyone's attention shifted toward Daisy. "Dad, what's happened to you? You've been acting strange lately. You're not yourself. You're the one who's acting strange. I've been teaching you everything I know day after day. So what more do you want? I'm thinking about your future. Do you remember? When I was little, you used to play ball with me in the yard. And you took me to the amusement park. And to the aquarium, too. Those were fun times. I don't remember. Why should I care about some worthless memories like that? Throw them away. They're worth nothing. And forget about your friends. They're all distractions from what matters in life." Ethan spat those words out with such bitterness. To me, it sounded as if he was desperately trying to reject his own past. When did this happen? When did Dad become like this? I said I don't know. What do you understand about me? I know what made you start treating me like this. It's Jasmine, isn't it? Daisy's words suddenly brought me to a sharp realization. Jasmine was Lucas's daughter, our niece, though we hadn't been close in a while. She was 2 years younger than Daisy and had just started attending a private middle school this year. Could Jasmine really be the cause? After Jasmine was accepted into that private school, Ethan began to chew his nails constantly, muttering, "How could his daughter?" All the while directing his frustration toward Lucas, who wasn't even there. For years, Graham and Harriet had proudly boasted about their eldest son, Ethan. But suddenly, they shifted their praise to Lucas, saying, "Lucas's daughter is impressive, and Lucas is the pride of the Montgomery family." I couldn't believe how quickly their attitudes changed. Dad was probably stressed because Jasmine got into the private middle school he really wanted me to go to. Right, when he was helping me study, he kept saying, "Lucas won't beat you." I think he was muttering that unconsciously. Ethan's face clouded, as if he wanted to say something, but the words didn't come out. But what really makes me angry is how Grandma and the others used to make fun of Lucas. But the moment Jasmine got into that private school, they started treating Lucas nicely. Isn't that right? Daisy's words ignited a fire of rage in Ethan's eyes. He clenched his fists tightly. "Just so you know, I don't see Lucas as the enemy. Jasmine isn't either. It's just you, Dad. You're the only one who sees them as enemies. Shut up, shut up, don't say another word. I'll make sure you never speak to me like that again." At the peak of his anger, he shoved me aside with all his strength and lunged at Daisy, who was standing behind me. But just before he could reach her, a strong police officer grabbed his arm and stopped him firmly. "This is enough. Don't add more sins to your name." Ethan continued to resist, but the officer held him down and pushed him into the police vehicle. "Let me go. A daughter has no right to defy her father. This is a failure in upbringing. You have no authority to stop me," he kept shouting even as they forced him into the police car. As I watched that scene unfold, Daisy grabbed my hand tightly. "Mom, thank you." Tears glistened in Daisy's eyes. I hugged her and wiped away her warm tears. After that, he was officially arrested for his excessive behavior toward his daughter. With that, the immediate threat to Daisy disappeared. However, I worried that the same tragedy might happen again when Ethan came back. So I sent a completed divorce paper to Ethan, who had been incarcerated. To my surprise, he didn't object. According to the attorney handling Ethan's case, he has become very quiet. It seems that Daisy's words had a profound impact on him, and he has been cooperating with the police interviews without any resistance. As Daisy pointed out, his motive appeared to be jealousy towards Lucas. He changed his approach to education entirely, forcing his daughter to study all night, believing it would help her get into a prestigious private high school. By doing so, he thought he could win back his parents' attention, which had shifted towards Lucas. Did Ethan really crave his parents' love that much? Following his arrest, the university hospital where Ethan worked immediately decided to terminate his employment. When this case was picked up by national news, the media eventually turned their attention to the clinic run by Graham. I knew it. I always thought there was something off about that family. This was the sentiment frequently heard from the neighbors. Rumor had it that the Montgomery family had a history of using education as an excuse to inflict violence on their two sons, from morning until night. It's no surprise that Ethan, growing up in such an environment, was starved for his parents' affection. It's unfortunate that his need for their love led him to over-discipline his own daughter. Due to the media coverage, the number of patients visiting the clinic sharply declined. Yet, no one expressed any sympathy for them. After my divorce from Ethan, I moved with Daisy to an apartment near my parents' house. Since it's within walking distance, my parents are delighted that they can see Daisy anytime. It's convenient for me too, as I can rely on them when work gets hectic. Daisy enrolled in the local public high school and joined the softball team, invited by new friends she met there. She devoted herself to practice daily and achieved the remarkable feat of placing in the top 4 in the state. During the rookie tournament, On top of that, she maintained the highest academic scores in every subject, making me incredibly proud of my daughter. Sometimes, mothers of the children who visit the clinic say, "Please thank Daisy for me." At first, I didn't understand what they meant, and I was puzzled. When I asked, I learned that Daisy had been volunteering at the after-school care program on days when she didn't have extracurricular activities, helping the children with their studies. One boy said, "Daisy taught me math. I couldn't do it before, but after Daisy taught me, I got it right away." My teacher at school even said, "That's amazing." Wow, that's impressive. But it wasn't just Daisy. You worked really hard too, didn't you? When I patted the boy on the head, he smiled innocently and said, "I want Daisy to teach me more," before being led away by his mother. Watching his smile, I couldn't help but think of Ethan. If only he could have connected with Daisy in a different way, maybe things would have turned out differently. However, there's no point in regretting the past. Right now, the only thing to do is to keep moving forward. I made Daisy go through something incredibly painful and sad. That fact will never disappear. Yet, as a mother, I was able to protect her. That, too, is a fact that will never fade. Around 6 p.m., I received a call from Daisy on my smartphone. "Extracurricular activities are over. Where are you, Mom?" "I'm just finishing up work and heading home now." "Great. Can you come pick me up? My friends are with me too. Please." On the other end of the phone, Daisy was laughing with her friends. I want to protect the bright future filled with her smiles. And from now on, I reaffirmed my commitment to live positively for that future.
Looking at my watch, it was past 8 o'clock at night. My daughter Linda and husband Tom wouldn't prepare dinner themselves, so they must be waiting for my return. As I was about to enter the living room, I heard Linda laughing loudly, saying, "Nowadays, fixing clothes and reselling them seems so poor." Were they watching TV or something? Never did I think they were talking about me until I heard Tom's voice that drained the blood from my face. "Mary too. She's got her quirks, kind of misunderstanding things, you know?" It seemed they were talking about me and my friend Mary. Frozen in place, I was forced to listen to a conversation I didn't want to hear. Their talk was nothing but derogatory towards me and Mary, making me feel dizzy. Slumped on the spot, my beloved dog Max came to comfort me. Their conversation continued, even mentioning throwing away Max, a mixed breed, along with my mother's sewing machine, which is a keepsake to me. Suddenly, I stood up. Without saying anything, I took Max, and before I knew it, I had fled the house. Where was I going? Even I didn't know, as Max whimpered vulnerably. Could I just return home as if nothing happened? No, that was impossible. I understood that those two were mocking us. I didn't want to return to a home where such people waited. I didn't want to feel that miserable. From that day, I never returned to that house. There are a few things that are precious to me. One of them, my mother's treadle sewing machine, is my most treasured possession. My mother used this sewing machine to make many clothes for me. Like my mother, I wanted to make clothes for my daughter too. Linda used to like the clothes I made for her, but that's a story of the past. Now that she's in high school, she hardly wears the clothes I tailor. In a cafe one afternoon, I was venting to my friend Mary. Back then, she used to say she loved Mom's homemade clothes. Now she says looking at me, using the sewing machine makes me look like a grandma. Now. You had your own moments too. Mary and I have been friends since high school. Sometimes she brings up things I don't even remember. Really? I feigned ignorance and took a sip of my iced coffee. Laughing, Mary meticulously checked the clothes I had mended. After graduating from high school's fashion department, Mary and I went on to the same college for fashion. Though we're on different paths now, our friendship hasn't changed. As expected of Jane. Perfect as always. I felt relieved hearing that from Mary. My repaired clothes would be displayed in Mary's select shop. After college, Mary got a job at a major apparel company, where she learned the ropes of sales and management before going independent. Linda's already in high school, and I wish she would work with me. After delivering the clothes, now it was Mary's turn to grumble. I tell you every time, it's just a hobby for me. I'm always worried if the repairs I do are good enough for your requests. Mary responded, Yeah. Got it. With a bored face. After that, as usual, we caught up on each other's lives and chatted about various things before parting ways. Walking home alone, I reminisced about the past. High school, college days. Those days of striving and competing every day on assignments. After graduation, I got a job at a textile company and gradually stopped making clothes. Losing my father early on and living with my mother and daughter, my mother passed away before I graduated from college. I was fully occupied with the unfamiliar environment and my job. When Linda was born after marrying a colleague from the same company, I realized the importance of family anew. Like my mother did for me, I began making clothes for Linda again, using my mother's treadle sewing machine. She used to be so obedient and cute. Arriving home, I sighed as I saw Linda lounging on the sofa watching TV. Jane, you used to say the same thing. I remembered what Mary said during the day. I wonder if I was such a lazy daughter in my mother's eyes. If so, my mother's love was truly great, and I am nowhere close to her. Oh, you're back? Linda finally noticed my return but didn't bother to move from her spot. I surely wasn't as lazy a daughter as this. Reassuring myself, I decided to start preparing dinner. I'm home. Tom got home after 10 p.m. Sitting next to Linda on the living room couch, he loosened his tie. Welcome back, Linda said, fiddling with her smartphone. While I was preparing the meal, the two of them were happily chatting as they watched TV. Tom and Linda get along well, but there is no blood relation between Tom and Linda. Linda lost her father in an accident when she was just 2 years old. After losing my previous husband, I had been getting sewing jobs through Mary's introduction, and that's how I met Tom. Linda, being a friendly child, quickly grew fond of Tom, and it didn't take long for us to remarry. Although I was afraid of losing my loved ones again, being with Tom, who is positive and resilient, eventually made me feel at ease. His cheerful and lively personality made me feel like he wouldn't die over trivial matters. And indeed, my happiness continues to this day. Isn't the outfit this person is wearing cute? Watching a celebrity on TV, Linda asked Tom. This is said to be trending this year. We've got them in stock at my store too. Tom manages a store known for affordable fashion. Really? Get one for me before they sell out. The casual exchange between Tom and Linda was irritating me. It's fine that Tom and Linda like brand new, trendy clothes, but I can't understand why they dispose of them so quickly every season. Clothes that are still wearable are cast aside for new ones, even though they were liked and bought. I wear my favorite clothes for years, mending or modifying them myself if they get a bit old or slightly torn. I know Tom and Linda think my way of handling clothes is old-fashioned, so I try not to comment on how they treat theirs, but Linda, you really know about fashion. Tom is indulgent with Linda, and at this rate, he'll buy her lots of clothes again. Tom, don't spoil Linda too much. Linda, why not get a part-time job and buy them yourself? When I told the excited pair, the conversation abruptly stopped. It's fine. Parents are supposed to buy their children clothes, right? Yeah. Girls, Linda's age, want to dress up. Try to understand that. Suddenly, it was as if I was the villain, being scolded by both of them, and I was at a loss for words. Anything more I'd say wouldn't reach their ears. Just keep it moderate, please. Leaving those words behind, I moved away from the living room, and their cheerful voices echoed behind me again. I felt incredibly empty. However, seeing my dog Max curled up and asleep in the bedroom soothed me. "Max, you're on my side, right?" I muttered, but Max only tilted his head. With a renewed sense of emptiness, I fell asleep next to Max. One day, I visited Mary's office. It was to check the condition of the vintage clothes Mary had bought abroad after I had finished repairing them. Mary, being my friend, doesn't compromise at all when inspecting the clothes I've mended. Knowing this, I prepare myself for delivery. Sometimes, when there are few items, we chat over coffee, but this time there were many, so I came to the office. Boxes were piled up everywhere. The first time I came, I mistook it for a warehouse. At the back was Mary's desk, and in front of it, a table and chairs for visitors, all picked out by Mary from antique shops. Her taste, unchanged since our student days, has always been something I admired. This one and this one are okay. I want a bit more alteration on this skirt. After finishing the thorough check, I sighed in relief. Something wrong? Mary's sharp gaze fixed on me. What? No, I'm just relieved. I'll fix it right away and get back to you. I quickly packed the clothes for resubmission to escape Mary's scrutiny. This batch didn't seem very you. Mary took an envelope from her desk and handed it to me. The payment for the clothes I had mended. I can't take it. It took too long, and I didn't meet your expectations. I refused, but Mary forced the envelope into my hand. I think your skills haven't dropped at all. This time, she looked into my eyes with sparkling ones. Far from declining, you're at a professional level. That's why I've made sure to include the appropriate fee for your skills. Mary's eyes shine when she's talking about work. And I know it's not just because I'm her friend that she acknowledges my skill and gives me a fair reward. That's right. I have something I want you to see, Jane. As I was about to leave, Mary, pretending not to hear, took something out of a cardboard box. A hand-carved horse, no, perhaps a donkey. This small figurine, small enough to fit in the palm of my hand, was something sold to tourists at an outdoor market in Africa. I think you have a better sense for trinkets than I do. What do you think about this? I give my honest opinion. And so, I rated each piece of trinketry that she kept bringing out one after the other. I enjoy these moments. Before I know it, time always flies by. Glancing outside the window, I realized it had long since become dark. Mary. Sorry, I have to go. Mary looked up in surprise at the office clock. Sorry for keeping you so late. But it was really helpful. Thank you. With a wave, I hurried out of Mary's office. Rushing through the office district, I hastened to the station through the night. The glittering streets filled me with longing. And I remembered that I had a dream too. To have many people wear the clothes I made. Even though I went to college for fashion. Watching the scenery flow by from the train window. If I had joined an apparel company instead of a textile manufacturer. If I hadn't married. If I hadn't had children. My self-deprecating thoughts led me back to the familiar residential area. And then, I returned to reality. Forgetting the dreams I had been reminiscing about, I hurried home. Checking my watch, it was past 8 o'clock at night. Neither Linda nor Tom would prepare dinner themselves, so they must be waiting for my return. Fortunately, they wouldn't be upset with takeout, so I stopped by the nearby supermarket to pick up something quick. Still, the lack of any message from them bothered me. Usually, I would inform or message them if I were going to be late, but today was neither. Moreover, it should be the first time I haven't prepared dinner and haven't come home until this hour. Soon after, I arrived home. The porch light was on, so they must be home. Perhaps they didn't mind me not returning, and I was the only one concerned about the time. That thought was rather lonely. Opening the front door, there was Max, tied up. He's usually free roaming, maybe they hadn't let him off after a walk. As Max looked up at me with watery eyes, I reached for his leash to set him free, when laughter from the living room reached me. Unable to hold back my irritation, I headed to the living room with Max. After all, Max was brought home by me. Wanting a dog for Linda, we went to a city adoption event where we met. Linda wanted a smaller, cuter dog, so we left that day, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. Unable to forget, I inquired later and found out he was about to be euthanized, so I couldn't stand it and took him in. Max came to us under those circumstances, but Linda and Tom were supposed to have welcomed him as a pet. Yet now, they were having fun inside while Max was left tied up in the cold entrance, which I couldn't forgive. As I was about to enter the living room, I heard Linda laughing loudly. Nowadays, fixing clothes and selling them again seems so poor. Were they watching TV or something? I never thought they were talking about me until I heard Tom's voice, which made my blood run cold. Mary too. She's too stubborn, or rather, there's some kind of misunderstanding. It seemed they were talking about me and Mary. Frozen in place, I was forced to listen to a conversation I didn't want to hear. Me, being swayed by Mary, fulfilling repair requests without much skill. Mary, using me without a shred of sense just because we're friends. Their conversation was nothing but derogatory towards me and Mary, making me feel dizzy. Slumped on the spot, Max came to comfort me. Their conversation continued, mentioning maybe throwing away Max, a mixed breed, along with my treadle sewing machine, a keepsake from my mother. Suddenly, I stood up. Without saying a word, I took Max, and before I knew it, we had left the house. Where were we going? I didn't even know myself. Max whimpered vulnerably. Could we just return home as if nothing had happened? No, that couldn't be possible. It was clear that those two were mocking us. I didn't want to return to a home where such people were waiting. I didn't want to feel that miserable. My feet moved in the opposite direction of home. Eventually, the residential area changed to an office district, and me walking with a dog seemed out of place. But I couldn't turn back now. When I reached the familiar buildings, I took out my smartphone and made a call. Jane! What's wrong? Surprised by my call, Mary rushed out of the building. I was just about to leave, but noticing Max sitting next to me, Mary seemed to understand something. Asking me to wait for a moment, she disappeared back into the building. After a while, she appeared with a large cardboard box. Can you bear with this for a bit, Max? She said as she packed Max into the box. Max, being smart and seldom barking, stayed quiet. Then, I shared with Mary what had happened back at the house. So that's what happened. As I spoke, the shock and anger faded, and I began to feel restless, wondering if the two of them were worried about my absence. Ignoring my fidgeting, Mary glanced at Max, curled up in the box, and muttered, "If they were worried, they would have called by now." Unable to fully grasp Mary's words due to my panic. What should I do? What should I do? I just wandered around the room, muttering, "Didn't you say you installed a pet camera for Max?" I could hear her this time, but when I looked at Mary, she seemed exasperated. Sighing heavily, she said, "If you're worried about what they're doing, why don't you check the camera?" Without looking at me, Mary continued to pet Max. I took out my smartphone to check the pet camera's feed. But my hands trembled, my heart raced, and my mind went blank. Max, who had been enjoying Mary's strokes, quickly ran to my feet. "If you can't look alone, shall I watch it with you?" Nodding to Mary's offer, I handed over my smartphone. Mary opened the pet camera app. The living room appeared on the screen. A pizza box was open on the table, left in disarray. Linda and Tom were still laughing joyously on the sofa. "They don't seem worried about you at all." I couldn't see it. It was clear they hadn't even noticed that Max and I had left the house. The shock hit me again, but this time, anger started to bubble up within me. "So, what now? What do you want to do, Jane? Do you still want to go back to that house?" Mary asked, seemingly enjoying the situation. "I don't want to go back." Hearing my decision, Mary smiled, pleased. "Then leave it to me from here." I never felt as reassured by Mary as I did then. At the same time, I realized how terrifying she could be as an adversary. Mary skillfully manipulated my smartphone, then showed me a shocking video. It was footage from the pet camera, but it showed Tom in the midst of an affair. "I never thought we'd find something this easily." Mary seemed thrilled, like a child who had found a fun new game. Mary had once worked at the same company as Tom. She had heard rumors about him through former colleagues. "It was just gossip, so I didn't take it seriously and thought it wasn't worth reporting to you." Her words felt like a blow as I was still reeling, but they helped me come to a resolution. "I've made up my mind." As if cheering me on, Mary winked. The next day, I waited for a time when Tom and Linda were out, and moved out my essential belongings. I did receive a message from Linda, but I only told her that I would be staying with Mary for a while. Seeing that it was read without any further response, it seemed she didn't care that I wouldn't be returning. I immediately started looking for a house where Max and I could live and decided to make a fresh start. Mary introduced me to a lawyer she knew, and she seemed oddly cheerful as usual. She always accompanied me when talking to the lawyer, providing valuable information. Hearing Mary's information, I felt my feelings for Tom cooling further. Seducing young part-timers at the store, causing him to be transferred from store to store. Is this why he's still just a manager despite his age? I felt embarrassed for living unquestioningly up to this point. I settled everything with Tom through the lawyer, but Linda was still on my mind. I wondered if she actually wanted to come with me. I wanted to at least see her and talk. So, when I came to pick up the rest of my stuff, and Linda was there, I approached her. "Linda, won't you come with me?" Linda, as usual, lay on the sofa, not even looking at me. "Are you mad because I decided to divorce on my own?" I asked, almost crying, to the silent Linda. Then Linda shrugged her shoulders. Was she crying? "Let's go together then." I couldn't leave my own daughter behind. I had already made her feel lonely before by marrying Tom, who wasn't her biological father. Surely, being with me would make Linda happier than staying with Tom. As I moved closer to take her hand, Linda finally spoke. "Are you delusional?" I thought Linda was tearful, but then she started laughing, holding her stomach. "You really didn't know anything, huh?" She spoke with a voice that seemed to pity me. Linda knew about Tom's affairs. In exchange for keeping quiet, Tom gave her money and lots of clothes. He's already looking for someone to remarry. Tom had been seeing other women even during our divorce negotiations. That's why everything went so smoothly. Are you okay with this, Linda? I wondered where Linda's true feelings lay. I was worried about her future. But Linda just smiled confidently. The woman Dad's marrying is young and kind, like a big sister. She had already met the woman who would become her new mother. They were planning to buy her a small dog and had gone clothes shopping together. I'm sick of the noisy sewing machine and that dirty mutt. Linda knew exactly how much those words would hurt me. As I stood there in shock, she dealt the final blow. I'm graduating soon anyway. As long as I have money, I can live on my own, so just send financial support. How could Linda be so optimistic without even having decided on her future career path? Where did I go wrong? I'll give up custody to Tom. If you want money, ask him. I coldly relinquished my motherly love. Linda didn't show any sign of being hurt by my words. And so, I never returned to that house again. Discovering a cold side of myself I never knew existed. Though I'm sure I love Linda, why didn't I insist on taking her with me? That's my only regret. 5 years have passed since then. Tom was fired from his job, and he and Linda are living modestly together. During the divorce, they signed a pledge never to involve me again, so I'm currently unharmed. Linda, after graduating, has been supporting Tom by hopping from job to job. If Linda ever reached out, I'd certainly extend my hand, but that will never happen. Jane, you're pausing again. Mary brought me back to reality. Since then, I've been officially working for Mary. My taking over the administrative work has made Mary's business even more agile, and her company has grown. Now we've moved to a larger property with space for my workshop and a place for Max to relax. I don't have kids, so I might not get it, but you're thinking of taking Linda back, aren't you? Mary asked while making coffee, always seeing right through me. I had indeed asked a lawyer to regain custody of Linda before. However, after hearing the voice on the voice recorder when the lawyer went to talk to Linda, I hesitated. If you get rid of that sewing machine and the mutt, I'm okay with it. That's when I realized I couldn't give up the sewing machine and Max for Linda. I abandoned my daughter. For my own dreams. For my own beliefs. Mary didn't say anything, just offered me a freshly made coffee. Thank you. We drank our coffee and then got back to work. Hoping that someday Linda will understand the value of these remade clothes. I continue to press on with the sewing machine. You must be Kevin? I hadn't seen my grandson Kevin since he was in elementary school, but I was certain it was him. He should be a freshman in high school this year, so the age fits. However, I didn't recognize the child he was carrying on his back. Hi. Grandma, it's been a while. Tears distorted my vision. I didn't know what to say, moved by the painful sight and the joy of reunion. Grown up now, he was, unlike me, never one to wear his emotions on his sleeve. Please, can you let us stay for the night? I didn't know what had happened, but there must be a reason they were out in this snowy weather, thinly dressed and at this place. The effort it took to come this distance in the snow, carrying a child, must have been immense. The child on his back was shivering. Their limbs were red and black from the cold, lips turning a shade of blue-purple. Kevin's legs were shaking, barely able to hold the child on his back any longer. I was about to nod, as if to say of course. Don't be ridiculous. I won't take care of that kid. My husband, Brian, who was supposed to be watching TV in the back of the house, came stomping to the entrance. He must have heard our conversation. Even I flinched at his presence, so a high schooler like him must be terrified. However, I see, he said with a smile. A hollow smile that twisted just his lips. It was as if he had expected this all along. My name is Abigail. I live a leisurely life in the countryside, a bit away from the city center. Now in my late 60s, Brian has retired, and we live on our pensions. Brian has always been incredibly stubborn and difficult. When he was working, he often clashed with others and seemed to be in constant trouble. But those who knew him well understood that Brian was just clumsy. He hated dishonesty and was hard to sway once he made up his mind. and he was terribly bad at expressing his feelings. Back then, I knew that Brian was more stubborn and clumsy than others, so I sometimes stepped in to help. I wasn't as capable at work as he was, but I was better at socializing. In a sense, we were opposites, but we naturally got along. We supported each other, eventually started dating, and got married. After getting married, we were blessed with our son, Matthew, right away. Brian, stubborn as he was, seemed to pour his kind of love into him. Thanks to that, Matthew grew up well, got married, and was blessed with Kevin. It seemed like our happiness would continue forever, but it didn't turn out that way. We've grown distant from Matthew for several years now. A huge fight between Brian and Matthew was the start of the rift. Even I, who usually stayed neutral, ended up taking Brian's side, so much so that I haven't seen him for years. And because of that, I haven't seen Kevin in a long time as well. It's been lonely not seeing my dear grandson, but it seems there's nothing I can do. It all started with Matthew's marriage. Matthew married a woman he had been dating since his student days, Isabella. Isabella lived nearby, and our families got along well, so Brian and I wholeheartedly celebrated their marriage. I remember when Kevin was born, Brian lifted him up with a beaming face, as if he was a different person. It was around the time Kevin entered elementary school that Isabella started coming to me with concerns. Matthew comes home late, and there are too many overtimes and weekend shifts. I tell him not to push himself too hard. I was touched by Isabella's genuine concern for him. Having a small child, his overtimes and weekend work must have been a significant stress. Brian was also a workaholic and had a tough time, so I could understand her feelings all too well. I also reached out to Matthew a few times, equally worried. Working too hard could break him. And if the company was that bad, it might be worth reporting to the appropriate authorities. That's what I advised. Before I could finish, Matthew let out an exaggerated sigh.
It's different from Dad and Mom's time. Don't butt in. I'm doing what I want to do.
And yelled. From his tone, I realized the company wasn't forcing the overtime or weekend work on him. What had suddenly happened? As a child, he used to complain about his dad always being busy with work. He wasn't particularly devoted to his job. It seemed like he viewed it merely as a means to earn money and live. Isabella must have been well aware of this, which is probably why she confided in me. My worry turned into suspicion from that day on. Sure enough, my sense of unease grew over time. Not long after, I received shocking news.
What? Isabella has passed away.
Tears filled the call from Isabella's parents. She had been hit by a truck while walking along a national highway. She was walking in a place without sidewalks at night, and the truck driver apparently didn't see her. Isabella was a serious and calm person, someone who wouldn't recklessly cross a national highway. At least, the her I knew wasn't that kind of person. Later, I heard that she had been acting distracted before the accident. Her parents occasionally received frantic calls from her. The content of those calls made my blood run cold. She said Matthew was having an affair. She knew the other woman was Madison, a clerk at his workplace. Why she was in a dangerous place where the accident occurred remains unclear. However, Isabella's parents believe that the shock of Matthew's affair led her to a nervous breakdown. I remained in shock for a while after the call ended. After receiving a message from Brian that he was on his way to the hospital, I finally snapped back to reality. By the time I arrived, Brian, who had left work early, was already at the hospital. Only Isabella's parents and Kevin, being held by them, were there. Apparently, the news of the accident was first sent to Matthew, but there was no response. Then it reached her parents, and finally, he was contacted at the very end. Despite his company being much closer to the hospital than our house, he was the last to arrive. And he didn't seem to be in any rush or showing signs of panic.
What the hell are you doing?
Brian, having heard about Matthew's demeanor and his affair, furiously confronted him. I had never seen Brian so angry. Yet, Matthew was defiant.
I did have an affair. But what happened to her was an accident, right? It's not my fault. The affair was her fault, not mine.
He blamed the root cause on Isabella not paying attention to him after Kevin was born. Once a child is born, parenting becomes the priority. However, for Matthew, who had always been the center of attention in the family, it was unacceptable that someone else was prioritized, even if it was his own son. Thus, he couldn't prioritize a lifestyle that favored Kevin, leading to Kevin not being very attached to him. This vicious cycle resulted in feeling out of place in his own home. He yelled in front of the late Isabella that her nervous breakdown was her own fault. Her parents broke down crying at his irresponsible words, and Brian was a step away from hitting Matthew. I could only try to calm Kevin, who started crying harder at the sight of the adults' argument. At that moment, I felt so helpless, watching the situation and not being able to do anything. This was how a decisive rift formed between us and him. Kevin pleaded for Isabella's parents or us to take him in, but Matthew refused. Though he confessed to the affair at the hospital, there was no further evidence, and no one had recorded the confession, so his affair wasn't proven. I was extremely worried about his selfish behavior. So, hoping it might help, I gave Kevin a map and contact information to our house. It was a bit of a walk from their house to ours, but it was better than nothing. If nothing else, that would be fine. And so, we parted ways. Later, I heard rumors that he had remarried to that Madison. I heard she is about 10 years younger than Matthew. There were rumors they were dating even though she knew he was married at the time. I was worried about Kevin. I had visited Matthew's house alone a few times, but it was always dark, and no one answered the doorbell. After several attempts, I gave up to avoid being reported as a suspicious person. It's been years since I last saw Kevin. Those memories keep coming back, even as life goes on. Even now, drinking warm cocoa, I think of him. He used to enjoy the cocoa I made. I wonder how he's grown, how he's doing, and if his family situation is okay. But all I can do is worry. I sip from my mug, looking outside. A cold wave has hit our area today, turning everything outside the window white. The surroundings are enveloped in night and terribly cold. I'll likely need to shovel snow tomorrow. You know, we might need to shovel snow tomorrow morning. I was about to discuss tomorrow's shoveling with Brian, who was watching TV, when the doorbell rang. Brian and I looked at each other. We don't know anyone who would visit us on a snowy night like this. With a bit of fear, we opened the sliding door to find a high school-aged boy standing there, carrying a small child on his back. His appearance catches my attention. The boy wears a slightly wrinkled white shirt under a school jacket and worn-out sweatpants. The small child is in a t-shirt, a thin hoodie likely for autumn, and shorts. Both have red limbs and a little snow piled on their heads and shoulders. Long footprints lead from the pure white garden to the road. It seems they walked here in this attire. As I realized this and looked at the boy's face, I was surprised.
You must be Kevin?
I hadn't seen Kevin since he was in elementary school, but I was certain. The corners of his eyes droop like Isabella's, and his nose is just like Matthew's. He should be a freshman in high school this year, so the age fits. However, I didn't recognize the child Kevin was carrying. Grandma, long time no see. Indeed, the high school-aged boy was Kevin. Tears distorted my vision. I didn't know what to say, moved by the painful sight and the joy of reunion. Grown up now, he was, unlike me, never one to wear his emotions on his sleeve. Please, can you let us stay for the night? I didn't know what had happened, but there must be a reason they were out in this snowy weather, thinly dressed and at this place. They must have come here relying solely on the address I gave him when he was young. The effort it took to come this distance in the snow, carrying a child, must have been immense. I was about to nod, as if to say of course.
Don't be ridiculous. I won't take care of that kid.
The one who came stomping to the entrance was Brian, who was supposed to be watching TV in the back of the house. It seems he heard our conversation. Even I froze at his angrily raised voice. Long having been together, if I'm taken aback, Kevin, a high schooler, must be terrified. Worried, I looked at Kevin and the child. But Kevin, unfazed by Brian's demeanor, muttered quietly, looking down. "I see," he said, smiling. It was a hollow smile that twisted just his lips. It was as if he had expected this all along. Anger rose in me at Brian for causing Kevin to make such an expression. No matter how stubborn or unforgiving, what kind of attitude is this towards an innocent, beloved grandson? Just as I was about to speak up, "I'm cold." The child on his back shivered. His limbs had turned even redder, his lips more purple. Kevin's legs were shaking, no longer able to carry the child on his back. Brian glared at the child on the back.
"We need to get to a hospital first. If you're not going, I'll take the car out." Oh.
Brian, wide-eyed, silently grabbed the car keys and hurried to the garage. I knew he could be hard to understand, but in his way, Brian was worried about Kevin and the child. "Can't take care of that child, huh? Always short on words." It meant the child was in too dire a state to be cared for at home. Right, that's the kind of man he is. I hadn't realized until now, but there was a hint of panic in Brian's actions. I followed his words and urged Kevin to the garage. "You've done well to make it this far. We're going to the hospital, so you can relax now. Let me carry the child."
"Oh, no, it's okay."
Kevin's face showed surprise, then confusion, as if trying to make sense of the situation. During this time, he readjusted the child on his back and, prompted, began walking towards the garage. It seems Kevin grew up to have a strong sense of responsibility. He always worries about the kids, putting himself last. Even though he's shivering with terrible frostbite. It was my role in the car to reassure him that everything would be okay. Afterwards, we managed to find a hospital open at night, and Kevin and the little one were able to see a doctor right away. When asking the doctor about their condition, they were diagnosed with frostbite and malnutrition. Fortunately, because we got them to the hospital immediately, there was no danger to their lives. I felt relieved. While he was being treated in the warm hospital, Brian was not his usual self. He was visibly worried, asking the doctor detailed questions about their condition and holding their hands to ease their anxiety. I wondered where his usual grumpy face had gone as I glanced at him, waiting for him to recover. Hours later, after receiving 4 fluids, Kevin were able to join us on our way home before dawn. In the car back, I asked him one question. It was about the little one he had been carrying. He had filled out the hospital paperwork, writing the child's name as Robert, aged 5. As expected, his response was as I thought. Robert was his half-brother with a different mother. In other words, another grandson for Brian and me. Cautiously, I asked about how they had been living at home up to now. Their attire, light despite it being winter, said it all, but I had to ask. Sure enough, Kevin revealed that he had been treated coldly by his stepmother, Madison, because he was from his father's previous marriage. He was always verbally abused and discriminated against in daily life, including meals. He couldn't even get new clothes. The school uniform he wore was the warmest clothing he had. Matthew, who should have been his real father, showed no interest in him. He essentially ignored whatever Madison did to him. Robert, the child of Matthew and Madison, was cherished as a baby by both. But as they gradually stopped caring, it became a nuisance, huh? They started to push Robert's care onto him. They always put themselves first, unable to prioritize their children. Luckily, he adored his much younger brother Robert. He had been taking care of him since he was in middle school. Just thinking about how Kevin had his own needs during adolescence, yet had to care for Robert, was heart-wrenching. Despite his inexperience, Kevin's dedication was evident in how close Robert felt to him. Robert, not used to being in a car driven by someone unfamiliar, was tense and didn't speak a word. He clung to Kevin, not wanting to be away from him, a clear testament to their bond. Finally, I asked why they had come to our home in the dead of winter, a journey difficult to make on foot. He was initially reluctant to speak. Yet, sensing my concern, he gradually opened up about their situation. Unbelievably, Madison and Matthew had left the children behind to go on a trip far away. They left hardly any food or money at home, so their supplies quickly ran out. Being winter break probably added to their desperation. Without food, Kevin and the young Robert would starve. With no school open and not wanting to impose on friends, Kevin felt he had no one to turn to. So, with a sense of desperation, he decided to make the journey to our home, tears in his eyes as he spoke.
Why didn't you contact us before?
Brian yelled at him with a stern voice while driving. The guilt of not reaching out to Kevin sooner and allowing Matthew's tyranny, plus the helplessness of not having been turned to for help before, was palpable to me. Understanding Brian takes time and effort. You really shouldn't say it like that. We're so happy that Kevin and Robert turned to us in the end. To Kevin and Robert, who had little interaction with him, Brian might just seem like a scary grandfather. Worried they might be frightened, I spoke up, but their faces showed no fear. Perhaps my deep concern for Kevin and Robert in the hospital had reached them.
I've wanted to contact you many times before, but I was worried about what Mom had told me, and I couldn't find the courage to reach out.
He awkwardly began to explain why he hadn't relied on us until now. After Matthew remarried, Madison yelled at him repeatedly.
You're not loved by your grandparents. Kids like you are a nuisance everywhere, so don't even think about relying on them. At first, I thought it was a lie. The grandparents I remembered were always kind.
But after being told repeatedly, he started to believe it was true.
I have memories of being loved as a child, and I couldn't believe that grandparents who had been so good to me would hate me. Now, I can think that way.
Yet, until recently, he had whispered that he felt unloved for some reason. Madison must have manipulated him into not seeking help from me or Brian.
So that's why you smiled when he yelled.
Kevin nodded. When Brian yelled at the entrance, Kevin had smiled, feeling empty, as if Madison's words had been proven right. Hearing this, Brian seemed even more regretful, his eyebrows furrowed.
But you both protected us.
Kevin said he finally felt at ease and cried. Perhaps triggered by his older brother's tears, or maybe because his tension was relieved, Robert also started crying. Upon arriving at our home, they immediately went to the bed we had prepared. It's warm, Kevin. Saying this, Robert rubbed his cheek against the blanket and fell asleep embraced by Kevin. Feeling both a sense of affection and sorrow, tears rolled down my cheeks. Their behavior suggested that they rarely had the chance to sleep in a warm, comfortable bed. Brian and I wanted to keep watching Kevin and Robert's sleeping faces forever, but we couldn't. We had a lot to do. In the morning, Brian took the car out again. He had the medical reports from the hospital and was going to file a complaint against Matthew and Madison. We prepared while waiting for them to return. Weeks later, when they returned from their trip and arrived at their home, the police were waiting and arrested them. Initially, Matthew accused me and Brian of kidnapping. He continued to assert this even when confronted with evidence. Brian and I feel responsible for how selfishly and terribly our son turned out. The last time we saw Matthew in court, his face had become even more severe than when we last parted. What went wrong? Did we make a mistake in how we raised him? Or was there some significant turning point in Matthew's adulthood? It might be too late to ponder these questions now, but seeing Matthew continue to hurl terrible words in court made me realize we've reached a point of no return. Now, we must focus solely on protecting Kevin and Robert, who have been deeply hurt. Brian and I discussed and decided to wholeheartedly support Kevin and his brother. Eventually, the two were arrested for neglecting their guardianship duties. The diagnoses of malnutrition, among other things, served as decisive evidence. The statements from me, Brian, and the boys likely helped support this decision. Suddenly, Kevin and Robert were left alone. With their parents arrested and nowhere to go, they wanted to come to our house. But I think we, who raised Matthew to abandon his parenting responsibilities, are not qualified to raise them. So, we also consulted Isabella's parents. They were relieved to hear Kevin was safe and were concerned for Robert, a child who should be a stranger to them. We'd like to take both of them in if we could. But sadly, it might be difficult to adopt Robert since they're not related by blood. And separating the brothers would be too cruel. That's why they said our home, where the brothers can stay together, is the best option. They also promised to support each other going forward. How kind are these people, to offer such gentle words to the parents of Matthew, who did terrible things to their daughter. Lately, I find myself tearing up easily. And so, it was decided that my husband and I would take in Kevin and Robert. When I took Kevin and Robert's hands and said, "From now on, you'll live with us," they showed us bright smiles. Still, they were quite reserved when they first moved in. But soon, we all warmed up to each other. He is always eager to help out. This year, we've had a lot of snow, but he's been forward in offering to help shovel it. Young Robert, trying to imitate what he sees, grabs a shovel and heads outside too. It seems he's at that age where he wants to mimic everything his brother does. Brian, watching the two, would complain but also teach them the tricks of shoveling snow. It seems he's quite pleased to be relied upon by the adorable Kevin and Robert.
"You can't even do this? Honestly, you guys are hopeless,"
Brian would say with a straight face, his usual grumbling. However, Kevin and Robert seem to know it's just his way of hiding his embarrassment and take it in stride. "We'll be better than Grandpa in no time, right, big brother?"
"That's right, maybe even by tomorrow."
Brian, as grumpy as ever, is becoming fondly attached to Kevin and Robert, including his difficult demeanor. Watching their heartwarming interactions, I'm busy preparing today's meal.
"Everyone, dinner's ready. Let's take a break."
Calling out loudly, the three of them walk over, laughing and smiling together. What a blissful everyday life we have. Winter is almost over, and the season of budding flowers is approaching. Between the four of us, warm times are passing by. I immediately put a temporary closed sign on the store and headed to the apartment where my son and his wife live. The room was pitch dark, and I couldn't see well. It felt cool inside, and it seemed like the heating was off. I called out the names of my two grandchildren as I entered the room. "Candy, Freddie. Grandma's here." As I moved further in, two small figures moved in the unlit living room. When I turned on the light, there was Candy, looking thin and cold. Beside her, her brother Freddie was shivering as he ate a banana from Candy's hand. Four frightened eyes stared at me.
"Candy, Freddie."
I couldn't help it and hugged them both. Candy and Freddie clung to me tightly and started crying loudly. Their little hands gripped my body tightly. How scared and alone they must have felt. They must have been terrified and heartbroken, wondering why Mom hadn't come back from the hospital. Thinking about their feelings made my heart ache. Their dad, Ethan, wasn't here. When I called him to find out where he was, he laughed it off and said, "We're on a family trip. We'll be back tomorrow." "Is that so? Make sure you're safe." I said so before hanging up. He was in for a shock when he returned home. I'm Brianna. I run a small restaurant, and today, like every other day, lunchtime was hectic. This place, tomorrow, was inherited from my parents-in-law. "Welcome. I'll get a table ready for you in just a moment." It's hard to keep up alone. Gerard, a regular, told me not to worry as I scrambled around.
"Take your time, no need to rush."
His words provided a small comfort. Some customers have been coming since my parents-in-law's time, while others are new, coming because they live or work nearby. I love this busy time when customers enjoy our food. When someone says the food is delicious, I do a little victory pose in my heart. I used to run this place with my husband. People always feel down when they're hungry. That's why we cook to cheer them up. That was his motto. We used to enjoy brainstorming the menu, counting the till, and rearranging the seating. When our son Ethan was born, we continued like this until he reached high school. But when Ethan was in his second year of high school, my husband passed away in an accident. It was a tough time, and I even thought about closing down. Ethan was preparing for university exams and couldn't help with the shop. I didn't think I could manage on my own. Then, one of our regulars said, "We'll wait for you," on the street with a warm smile. Seeing that smile, I decided to try running it by myself once again.
It'll be all right, we can make it work.
I downsized to a manageable size on my own, consulting friends and my still living parents-in-law. 3 months after my husband's death, tomorrow had its restart. Ethan passed his university entrance exams and was accepted into his first choice school.
I want to live on my own since it's far from home. Sure, that's fine. Let's go house hunting soon.
I tried to accommodate Ethan's requests as much as possible. Because both my husband and I were always busy with the shop, we hardly had time for Ethan. The shop was flourishing, and we couldn't neglect it. After closing, my husband would stay for preparations. And I would come home to cook dinner and wait for him, entertaining Ethan.
Dad, are you working again today?
I remember Ethan asking that every night when he was little. With a look of loneliness. I wish we could have had more family dinners, but those were rare. I feel guilty for making Ethan feel lonely all this time.
I want you to learn what you want, find what you love, and pursue it with all your heart.
That's what I told Ethan on the eve of his university entrance exams and his moving out. Ethan just nodded silently, looking down. He said no more. Even after he started living on his own, I kept running the small shop by myself. We had enough savings for his university tuition, so we didn't need to use any scholarships. The 4 years he spent as a college student flew by in the blink of an eye. During that time, I continued to run the shop alone. After graduating, Ethan found a job and started working. Imagining Ethan leaving for work in a suit and tie made me smile quietly to myself, thinking about how much that little boy had grown. He even had a girlfriend he was serious about, planning to marry. I was so surprised when I met her that I almost couldn't believe my eyes. Ethan's girlfriend, Drew, was as beautiful as a magazine model.
Nice to meet you, I'm Drew. I'm dating Ethan.
Her voice was so lovely and her manner of speaking so polite that I was overwhelmed. I thought she must be from a very wealthy family.
Not at all, we're just a normal family.
She laughed, gracefully. I wondered what kind of charm Ethan had to attract such a wonderful person. They were already living together, or rather, Ethan had moved into Drew's place.
I had no choice, my room was too noisy next to me.
No choice, Ethan.
It's fine. I was renting a slightly larger room anyway, so it worked out well.
Drew said this cheerfully, as if to offer a lifeline. Her polite speech, graceful gestures, and bright smile. I liked her immediately and couldn't help but say,
Ethan may be like this, but please, take good care of him.
Thus, they happily married, and 3 years later, they had 2 children. The firstborn was a girl named Candy. The second was a boy named Freddie.
I've become a grandma, haven't I?
I mused, speaking to my husband's photo. Even after the children were born, Drew made time to visit the shop.
Hello, Brianna. Oh, welcome. Drew, what about your work? After the children were born, I switched to a job I could do from home. Oh, what a time we live in.
I marveled, alternating my gaze between young Candy and Freddie. These little ones would also grow up and become independent like Ethan. Thinking about it made children seem all the more mystical, and I found myself staring at them longer. As the seasons came full circle, my 2 grandchildren grew. My face gathered more wrinkles, and before long, Candy was in elementary school.
Candy, how old are you now?
I asked her one day when she came to visit the shop.
I'm 6 now, and I'll be 7 on my next birthday.
Her response was so mature, it didn't seem like she was in elementary school. She must take after her mom. According to Drew, she takes good care of her younger brother, which is a big help.
They don't fight and get along very well,
she said, proudly talking about them. Everything seemed to be going well, and it felt like all was leading to a bright future, but that wasn't entirely the case. There was one thing that worried me. It was about Ethan. He couldn't seem to keep a job for long after getting employed. He left the company he joined right after graduating within half a year.
There's too much to do. It's not worth the salary.
Then he got another job. But he left that one too, within 3 months.
I can't do what I want, and it's impossible to work without remote options these days. Changing jobs so frequently won't get you anywhere. It's not my fault. It's the bad economy.
He would always find some excuse to quit his job. Watching him do this made me sigh in resignation.
If you're not working, you should at least take care of Candy and Freddie.
Me? No way.
That's Drew's job, not mine.
Drew was the one supporting the family instead of Ethan. Even while talking to me, Ethan was glued to his smartphone. I wondered what he was so engrossed in.
Hey, Mom, take a look. I enjoy food blogging as a hobby and post it on social media.
He showed me his phone, filled with photos of various dishes from different places. The photos of delicious-looking food. Ethan talked about his follower count and likes, but I didn't quite understand.
Why don't you stop playing around with that and get a proper job? It's not just for fun. I'm serious about becoming an influencer. What's that? Just follow me on Mom and hit like. I don't understand all that. Give me your smartphone. I'll install this app and then you do this.
With quick finger movements, he went through account setup and registration in no time. He also showed me which button was for liking and how to navigate the app. But after he left, I still didn't quite get it.
I can't keep up with all this.
I put the smartphone aside and focused on the shop's ledger instead. When I occasionally video call with Drew, she mentioned she was also told to check Ethan's social media. Despite having more important things to look after right here, I'm happier video calling with Candy and Freddie than browsing social media. Ethan had helped out at my shop for a bit right after he lost his job. He said it seemed easier than working at a company. Though no job is truly easy, having him help was appreciated. I heard it's becoming less common for children to take over their parents' businesses. I wasn't planning on forcing the shop on him. I was prepared to close it when the time came. However, I harbored a faint hope that maybe Ethan had changed his mind. Excitedly, I had Ethan help in the shop, greeting customers and taking orders. He got along well with the regulars, a refreshing sight. The first week seemed to start off well.
Perhaps he's more suited to this than office work.
That was what I thought, but from the next week Ethan began to slack off. He hardly took any orders, didn't clean up much, or assist customers. Worse, he started browsing social media in front of customers. He even asked customers, both regulars and new ones, to follow him and like his posts. The next day, Ethan didn't show up at the time he was supposed to work.
Ethan, where are you? Are you off today?
I quit that job.
It was harder than I thought.
After that, he wouldn't answer my calls, and I was back to running the shop alone. Ethan stopped coming to the shop altogether after less than 10 days. Since then, Ethan focused more on social media than anything else. Meanwhile, Drew recently started working multiple jobs and cutting back on sleep. I worry she might collapse from overwork. But Ethan shows no concern and continues his food blogging and social media posts. During a rare video call, Drew let slip her true feelings. "I wish he'd at least earn some money." She looked unusually downcast, her usual bright smile gone. And her beautiful voice sounded dull. Ethan continues to be out and about, not at home. When I criticize his actions, he always says,
"Being famous and expanding my network will lead to a future."
Despite doubting the reliability of his plan, I listened. But if Ethan could make a living out of it, I also wanted to support him. Somewhere deep down, I too indulged in the hope of letting Ethan do what he wanted. Drew, too, believed in Ethan and couldn't bring herself to criticize him harshly. His actions, whether due to them or not, did result in a slight increase in followers and likes. However, I soon realized it was a mistake. One day, as usual, I was at the shop. It was as cold as midwinter outside, cloudy, and the forecast mentioned possible snow in the evening. Since customers rarely come after lunch, I spent the time on evening prep and cleaning. While wiping the tables, my smartphone rang in my pocket. It was Drew. Expecting another regular video call, I answered. But what came through was a very weak voice. "Brianna, I'm sorry. There's something I need to tell you." She had collapsed from overwork a few days ago and would be hospitalized for a while.
"Hospitalized? How are you now? Are you okay?"
"I'm managing."
"You should have told me sooner without hesitating."
"So sorry. I wanted to tell you, but Ethan said there was no need."
"Ethan did?"
"He said he would take care of the kids. But I'm worried about them."
"Of course you are. What about Ethan? Is he at home?"
It seemed unlikely that he would do such a thing. But with his wife hospitalized, even Ethan would presumably take care of the children. "He said he would look after the kids." I want to believe him, but... Hearing the hesitation in her voice gave me an uneasy feeling. "He's been posting photos on social media. I'm afraid he might not be looking after the children." Drew also followed Ethan's social media. And, suspecting as much, she checked the app. It turned out that on the day Drew was hospitalized, and the day after, he was carelessly posting pictures of his meals. I listened to Drew's story, dumbfounded. And those restaurants, they're quite far away. Something had to be done. I couldn't imagine children under 10 being able to fend for themselves, especially not with both parents absent.
"Understood. I'll head over to your place right now."
"Oh, could I come with?"
"No, Drew. You need to rest properly."
I ended the call a bit sternly to ensure. She wouldn't insist on coming. She needed to stay put under doctor's orders. I immediately put a temporary closed sign on my shop and headed to my son and his wife's apartment. It wasn't too far away, luckily. Having a spare key for emergencies like this was a relief. I hurriedly unlocked the door and entered.
"Candy! Freddie! Where are you?"
The room was pitch dark and hard to see. Stepping inside, something like a plastic bottle brushed against my foot. The silence was eerie as I took another step into the cool, unheated room.
"Candy, Freddie! Grandma's here!"
Moving further in, I noticed two small shadows in the unlit living room. Turning on the light, I found a shivering Candy, looking thin. Next to her, Freddie was trembling, eating a banana from Candy's hand. 4 frightened eyes stared back at me.
Candy, Freddie.
I couldn't help but hug them.
Grandma.
Candy and Freddie clung to me, crying loudly. Their small hands gripped me tightly. How scared and alone they must have felt. They were terrified and heartbroken, wondering why Mom hadn't returned from the hospital. Thinking about their feelings, my heart ached.
I'm sorry I didn't notice sooner. Everything's okay now.
I turned on the heating and, until the room warmed up, dressed them in extra jackets. I boiled water in the kitchen and made hot chocolate. Candy and Freddie happily drank their hot chocolate, seeming to relish it. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. In fact, I hadn't even seen anything that looked like his shoes. Hoping it was a misunderstanding, I called Ethan. He answered immediately.
Mom?
What's up? He replied nonchalantly.
What are you doing? I'm trying out this limited time menu right now. It's definitely worth a look.
Where are you now?
On a family hot spring trip. I'm coming back tomorrow.
In the background, I could hear the bustling noise of a tourist spot. Clearly, he was there alone, not with his family. He seemed utterly unconcerned. About Drew or Candy and Freddie. I realized I had to protect them. Trying to stay calm, I said, "Is that so? Stay safe."
Huh? Oh, yeah, about souvenirs.
Before Ethan could finish, I hung up. He had kept Drew's hospitalization a secret. And just for some limited time food, he left his children alone. According to Candy, Ethan lied about going to work. I knew it. Mom worked too much and collapsed, right? Even at a young age, she understood why her mom had collapsed. Knowing the word overwork, she understood that her mom had been working too much. Why can't Ethan understand what even a child can? Mom looked really sick. So, I fed Freddie what was in the fridge.
And you, Candy? Did you eat anything?
No, I waited. She shook her head. Her cheeks were hollow, and for an elementary schooler, she was too thin. They hadn't eaten anything during the days without their parents. We haven't been to school. I want to see everyone. But I thought we had to wait for Dad. Tears welled up in Candy's eyes again.
You are one tough little girl, Candy.
I decided to stay at the apartment that day. I wanted to cook something for the kids, but the fridge was empty. Certainly, you can't make omelette rice with just ketchup.
It can't be helped. Let's eat out. What do you two want to eat?
Their hunger unleashed a torrent of requests, unable to settle on just one. Eventually, we went to a restaurant where they enjoyed pasta, mac and cheese, and cake. Seeing their full smiles reassured me. People always lose their spirits when hungry. I remembered my husband's words. Returning home full, the two quickly fell asleep. Watching their peaceful faces, I thought about Ethan. The next day came, and Ethan still hadn't returned. I checked his social media while talking with Candy. It's amazing how much information can be shared, but it also meant Ethan's actions were transparent. Today, he was at another restaurant, this time eating pizza. Ethan, just you wait. I took the kids to visit Drew in the hospital. It seemed we arrived just as she was being discharged. At the entrance, Drew and the kids joyfully reunited. But why are you here?
What Ethan is doing is inexcusable. You all need to come home.
But we can't impose on you.
The one imposing is Ethan. I'm so sorry for what he's done.
I whispered a plan to Drew. She was surprised at first, but then resolved to act. Eventually, Ethan returned home a week later than he said, only to find an empty house.
What? What's this?
Even this became a post on his social media, treating it as a joke. Minutes after posting, he showed up at my restaurant.
Hey, listen, Mom. Drew and the kids.
He started off incredulously, as if he couldn't believe it.
Nobody's home, and everything's gone.
And? It was lunchtime, and the restaurant was full of regulars. Eager for sympathy, Ethan began to loudly share his story.
I was doing it all for my family. Working hard on social media, and my wife and kids run away.
Oh, that's tough. While I listened disinterestedly, the regulars reacted differently. Chairs scraped as they slowly converged on Ethan.
Terrible, right? Right, everyone?
Ethan, clueless of the sentiment against him, tried to rally support.
You're on social media, right? Yeah. A fan? Thanks for following. Don't joke. You practically forced us to follow you. Huh?
The others nodded in agreement.
Getting notifications was annoying. Then we see you disrespecting food. Did I do that? Playing with free toppings, saying dishes are bad after one bite. But that was just a joke. And you neglect your own wife and kids to play around. Like I said, I was becoming an influencer to earn money. What influencer?
Gerard, a regular, was red with anger as he scolded Ethan. Other regulars joined in, criticizing him, and the restaurant erupted in disapproval. Actually, I had filled in the regulars about Ethan's behavior just before he arrived. After being discharged, Drew immediately terminated the apartment lease. Now, she and the kids are living with me. As Ethan failed to support his family, preferring to dine out alone. Focused only on increasing his followers and likes on social media, he neglected his responsibilities. Upon hearing everything, the regulars, already familiar with Ethan's conduct online, were furious. One said,
I'll give him a piece of my mind.
Gathering others for support.
I'll give him a piece of my mind.
Gathering others for support. Unaware, Ethan continued posting on social media.
Stop it! I'm not the bad guy. Help!
Half crying, Ethan was physically pushed out of the restaurant by the regulars.
Don't ever show your face here again.
Ethan was sternly reprimanded by the regulars and ran away screaming. After that, he was nowhere to be seen. Weeks passed. The weather forecast started to mention the arrival of spring and the need for pollen allergy measures. Lately, my nose has been a bit itchy, perhaps due to the pollen. Drew suffers from hay fever, constantly complaining about her runny nose. I've noticed more of the regulars wearing masks too. I wonder about Ethan, but as far as I know, he didn't have hay fever. His whereabouts remain unknown. He was so focused on becoming famous, urging even his friends to follow him. But this desire backfired spectacularly. Since that day, informed followers quickly made his social media blow up. Naturally, his identity was recognized by those around him, and returning to this town is unlikely now. His disregard for food got him the comeuppance he deserved. I continue running the diner, living with Drew and the kids. Recently, we launched a website for tomorrow where customers can make reservations via smartphone. Drew, who works in web design, easily handled the task. The website features our dishes and the spirit of the diner inherited from my parents-in-law. And even mentions my husband. I never met my father-in-law, but through these stories, it feels like I have.
What a lovely website. Thank you, Drew.
Her contributions don't stop there. She has systematized the inventory and sales accounting, making daily bookkeeping much easier. What used to be done by hand now calculates automatically when entered into the computer.
How convenient.
Even I, who was not accustomed to smartphones, found it easy to adapt. Thanks to also accommodating phone reservations, we've seen an increase in customers. Candy, returning from elementary school, started to drop by the diner. She handles phone calls with care.
Yes, this is tomorrow. Yes, would you like to make a reservation?
Though slightly hesitant, she shakes her head affirmatively when asked if she needs help.
Our recommendation? It's the fried chicken. It's freshly made and crispy.
Watching her consult her notes while speaking, she's charmed the regulars. Everyone loves her adorableness. As I manage the diner day by day, I wonder if she might take it over someday.